Well, David Marsh is the author of the new book, How Could the Euro Crisis, or How the Euro Crisis Could Be Solved and Why It Won't Happen. It's a scathing analysis of the failure of crisis management and decision-making in the Eurozone. David's also the former Europe editor of the Financial Times newspaper. He's written several other books about Europe, and I'm happy to say David joins me now in the studio. Very honoured to have you here. Now,
Thank
your
you.
latest book suggests that crisis management in the EU has not only failed, but that constructive dialogue has collapsed and decision-making is in a state of terrified paralysis. Not my words. Sounds like a recipe for a Brexit.
Well, there's several different issues there. Firstly, Europe has been limping very slowly towards some kind of a solution for this euro crisis, which has now been rumbling on for several years. The trouble is that politics has rather got in the way of this, because just as they're getting some of the economic house in order, after much austerity and much pain, the political climate in much of Europe has turned against the mainstream politicians. Now, regarding Brexit, obviously we're not in the euro. Britain kept out of the euro very wisely, and there is quite a lot of firewall between Britain and the monetary union. On the other hand, if the whole of Europe is going to go to hell in a handbasket, we're going to be picking up some of the bill anyway, because we do a lot of trade with Europe. My own feeling is that, and it's very fine judgment this, that we should just about stay in the EU this time round, but carry on arguing for reform from within, and certainly make sure we have got as little as possible to do with the monetary union construct, which has been a disaster.
So less than 6 weeks to go before that UK referendum. Your sense is that Britain ought to stay, but how does the balance sheet objectively look? Is Britain likely to stay or leave?
Well, nobody knows, of course, but I think that we will stay in. I think that the innate conservatism of the British public will probably once again sway the day. I think some of this fear-mongering that the government has been doing has certainly been counterproductive. They have been indeed over-egging the pudding. We've had everything: war, plague, pestilence, some biblical pestilation will be brought down on Britain. It's just overdoing it, actually. But you can make a very rational judgment that says we do get our money's worth out of the rest of Europe. And also, my big fear is the rest of Europe would start to disintegrate if we left. Now, I know that seems to be saying Britain's terribly important. Oh, they're all going to go to hell if we leave. But I think there's lots of currents in lots of countries that would see this as a catalyst. And again, we can't just wash our hands of this. We do a lot of trade with Europe, and also we do depend on Europe for a lot of stability in our general security relationships. I think it would be rather reckless to put all that to waste.
But if Britain decides to leave, can such a divorce be amicable, or is it likely to be mean and nasty?
It will be mean and nasty, but it'll be mean and nasty over a period of years. I think the shock will be short and sharp for Britain if we were to leave. I think that Britain is resourceful enough and international enough, globalised enough already to get over this shock. I think we could withstand it. My fear is that the shock would be relatively short for us, but for the rest of Europe be a long, lingering pain, while other countries decided to have referendums that could take 3 or 4 or 5 years. I can tell you 10 countries that would probably have a referendum campaign in Europe, in East, West, South and North. That would be pretty painful and pretty bloody. That's where the blood will be spilt, not so much in Britain, but in the rest of Europe.
So short of leaving the EU, what are the potential paths out of this huge impasse that your book discusses? I mean, how could they, for instance, have dealt with the migrant crisis differently?
Well, you see, the migrant crisis actually shows the paradoxical nature of this. Europe looks incredibly stable for people outside who are coming from some benighted place like Syria. So that's why they're all coming here. You know, they're not going south, are they? So in some ways, Europe does offer a great deal of stability and order. The euro crisis will only be solved if there are large debts now to be written off, which will mean the Germans and the Dutch in particular, the large creditor countries, have to forego some of their savings because Greece and some of the other southern countries cannot possibly repay their debt. So there's going to have to be a debt rescheduling. Britain will not be part of that. But unless that is decided, and there's been some signs in that direction in Brussels in the last few days, principally because the Germans are really scared of disruption, then I'm afraid Euro land will continue to go from crisis to crisis, and one day it will break up in some way.
And what sort of crisis would Britain face? I mean, could it mean, for instance, Prime Minister David Cameron, it would be curtains for him?
Well, it all depends on what the vote is, and also what the
in other words,
if it's say,
vote to leave,
let's say 60% to leave and 40% to stay, then I think he's gone. If it's something like 51 to leave and 49 to stay, then I think he's got a chance not only of hanging on but getting a second referendum. Whatever people say, I think they would come back again for more. Let's say we do stay, and then I think, which I hope we will, I will probably be voting to stay, then I think we've got to be incredibly tough with the rest of Europe. We've got to argue for all these reforms that they all know they have to do. And we'll have to say, I'm afraid, that if they don't play ball with us this time around, we'll have another referendum in 4 years. I know you might say this sounds a bit daft to have a so-called once-in-a-lifetime chance and then have another one in 4 years, but I actually think there's a way that we can get our way. We can, as Cameron says, have our cake and eat it, or eat our cake and have it, as you might say, is more logical, by staying in but arguing still for very, very tough-minded reforms.
Well, David, I'm rather disappointed that you didn't bring an autographed copy of your new book, but thank you very much indeed for coming in. David Marsh, the author of the book How the Euro Crisis Could Be Solved and Why It Won't Happen. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.